Hello there, we'll look at the prospects for the harvest and also haymaking in just a few moments, but first let's take a look further afield at some of the major weather stories that have been impacting agriculture around the world over the last week or so. Now in the US, of course, it's been a very wet spring. We had a lot of rain, extensive flooding, and that had a big impact on corn and soybean production earlier on through March and April. But thankfully in recent weeks it's been much drier, and that's been helping things improve for the harvesting here, and also improving conditions for the winter wheat harvest on the high plains as well, because of those dry conditions and warmer conditions developing here as well. Now elsewhere in South Asia, the monsoon continues to be behind schedule. It's about 2 weeks behind right now, and as you can see, that's having an impact on crop sowing here. Moving further south across Australia, we've had some showers recently in the south and the west, and that's improved the soil moisture for the wheat here, but actually conditions continue to be rather dry further north and east. And closer to home across Europe, of course, the big headline over the last week to 10 days has been the heat. Temperatures up to 45, 46 degrees in southern France. That's had a big impact on vineyards there, with some crop really damaged by the heat there, but also it's promoted harvesting of the winter crop and also sped up the summer crop more towards reproduction as well. Now we did get some of that heat briefly back at home in the UK at the very end of June. So here's a look back at the month of June for East Anglia, for example. Now overall for this region, temperatures were above average, about 0.8 degrees above average, but actually that figure masks a lot of day-to-day variation, as you can see here. So what we have here is the mean temperature for each day and how it differs from the average as you go through the month of June. You can see this brief spell of hot weather at the beginning of June, where we hit temperatures up to about 28, 29 degrees, but it only lasted a couple of days. And actually for a good chunk of the month, we had a fairly extensive spell of below average temperature days and also quite wet conditions as well, particularly around the 12th and the 13th of June. And then later on in the month, we saw a couple of days of very humid conditions developing here, mostly dry, the odd isolated thunderstorm. That high pressure built in towards the end of the month, courtesy of that heat wave over Europe. So we had a couple of days here with a cold undercut off the North Sea. So actually the air above us was quite hot, but right at ground level, because the winds were coming off the North Sea, meant temperatures were actually below average. And then towards the very end of the month, the winds changed direction, and we got that heat coming back in, temperatures over 30 degrees across much of England in particular on the 29th of June. So you can see how the variation through the month here dictates what the overall temperature is. But what you'll notice is there are a lot more blue days, below average days on this graph, than there are red ones. But when we got the hot days, they were quite spiky compared to the rather shallower blue days here as well. And that just shows you how averages doesn't quite tell you the full story for a month at least. Looking at rainfall, that's been a big talking point for many months now. It's been very dry. This is over the last 3 years for East Anglia. Now on here, these brown bars indicate each month that's been below average and by how much, and equally the green bars here indicating where conditions have been wetter than average and by how much. And you'll notice there's a lot of brown bars here indicating a lot of below average months for rainfall over the last at least 3 years, but actually extending beyond that as well. Now the June just gone really stands out because we had finally a month of significant rain, well above average, and a stark contrast to last June, this bar here, which was actually our second driest June on record. So big contrast between 1 year and the next. It has improved the rainfall deficit for the last 12 months. That's dropped down to 91 millimetres, and that's represented by this solid red line here over the last 12 months. You can see it just coming up right at the end there. So conditions are improving slightly, but we are still, as you can see, below normal, and the soils are still quite dry at the moment. So we do need more rain on top of our normal average rain that we would normally see through the coming months as well. And really for the last 3 years or so, 233 millimetre deficit right now, which is shown here by this dashed line here. And even if you go back to 5 years, there's still a significant deficit of rainfall as well. So we do need some rain. I know we're trying to make some hay at the moment, which means you want the dry weather, but equally the ground is still quite dry and we do need some extra moisture to be put into the soil. Now we will see a little bit of rain, I think, this Saturday, courtesy of this rather weak cold front. It may well be the first rain that some of us have recorded for over a week or so. There's not going to be a lot on it, but a little bit of rain as this front slips south through the course of Saturday daytime. Behind it, we've got a run of northerly winds coming down effectively from the Arctic, so some quite chilly air will be filtering in behind that as we go through the weekend. But ultimately, we're keeping an eye on this area of high pressure building in as we head into the beginning of next week, because things will continue to be rather dry looking for several days to come. So in a little bit more detail, you can see these showers associated with that cold front. Not for everyone, but a few places may get a few millimetres here and there. A few isolated showers potentially through Sunday and on into Monday, driven by the daytime heating, but you can see the high pressure sort of expanding here across the UK into the beginning of next week. So really dry weather does prevail for the next 5 days or so. Weather fronts trying to come in from the west off the Atlantic into the far northwest of the UK, and they'll make more progress, I think, into the middle part of next week as our area of high pressure starts to retreat away to the southwest, allowing these weather fronts and areas of low pressure to make more inroads across the UK towards the middle of next week. So this graphic here is for next Tuesday. Now beyond that, we have to look a little bit higher up in the atmosphere at the jet stream. During the course of the early part of the week, there's hardly any jet stream over us, which is why things are very weak, nothing moving about too much. But look out west and the jet stream's starting to get a bit more active, coming all the way out of Canada across the Atlantic and likely to drive some areas of low pressure closer to the UK. Now there's still quite a bit of uncertainty at this stage, but it looks like towards the middle of the week we might see more of an active jet coming across the UK, and so a greater chance of some more unsettled weather developing potentially across the UK. As I say, there's still a bit of uncertainty about how things will play out. So to show this in a little bit more detail, we'll use ensemble forecasting, where we run the same computer model multiple times and see the slight differences that the outcomes are as you go forward in time. And that's why the spread gets larger as you go forward in time, because obviously each model will start to diverge on what it thinks the weather will do. But fairly good confidence at first. You can see here with the pressure here fairly high through the first part of this weekend. It dips a little bit as that weak cold front comes through on Saturday, but not a great amount. And then actually the high pressure builds back in again a bit more as we go into through Sunday, Monday, and the early part of Tuesday. So largely dry conditions, often settled, nothing desperately windy, not a great amount of rain to talk about, just isolated showers. This graph at the top here shows the rainfall, and you can see there's small amounts of rain showing up here and there. That's just a few isolated showers, nothing widespread or massively significant, and some places ultimately will end up staying dry. Then towards the middle part next week, notice how we've got this downward turn in the pressure graph here. That's with that area of low pressure potentially coming in off the Atlantic, but there's quite a bit of spread as to how deep this area of low pressure could be, how far south it may push. And that will dictate, therefore, how much rain we get. But notice there's a much bigger spike here during the middle part of the week across East Anglia for this graph, but this could be replicated across the UK as well. So overall, the signs are that the week starts dry underneath high pressure, or largely dry, and then towards midweek we start to get low pressure coming in with a greater chance of rain. Notice one or two of these members coming up here for 15 millimetres or so, so there could be some locally heavy rain depending how things play out. You may get some heavier showers, maybe the odd thundery one mixed in, which can, on a local scale can give you quite a bit of rain. Then later on in the week that low pressure moves away, so it looks like higher pressure will try to build back in again. Again, I stress there's still quite a big spread here, so it's not guaranteed it will happen, but the signal here, the red line, the average conditions suggesting the pressure will build towards the following weekend. Thereafter, there is a lot of uncertainty. The spread is fairly big. There's no real signal in this red line. It goes straight through the middle. But there are continued rain chances showing up. So it's not looking like it's going to be particularly excessively wet nor excessively dry. It's more typical conditions for July, really, with high pressure coming and going, the odd low pressure trying to come in, bringing us the odd bit of rain, the odd shower here and there. So not a prolonged dry spell, probably, not a prolonged wet spell either, but more of the same, really, of what we've seen over the last few days or so. In terms of temperature, well, that's dictated by where the areas of low pressure go. But to give you an example, this is for 850 millibars, which is about 1 mile above the ground, if you like. And it's a good indicator of the type of air mass over us because it's not directly affected by the input from the sun day to day. So what you can see here is we're in very warm air at the moment. We've had temperatures in the mid-20s over the last few days. That will dip quite sharply as that cold front comes through this weekend. Now, it's not going to turn massively cold, but the temperatures by day will come back down into the mid to high teens. We could have 1 or 2 chilly nights, potentially Sunday night into Monday morning, temperatures down to 6-7 degrees in the countryside in southern Britain, and actually across Scotland we may just about get a touch of grass frost in the odd sheltered glen, but not a widespread thing by any means. Now, temperatures will recover, we think, as we go into next week. There's a fairly good signal for the temperature to rise here, the air mass to warm up. Towards the end of the week, the spread is fairly large, but there is a signal with that higher pressure building towards next weekend. We might see the temperatures recovering just a little bit, so perhaps turning a touch warmer, slightly above average perhaps towards next weekend, at least across southern Britain. And then thereafter again, the spread here is fairly messy, no clear signal as to which way it could go. It could potentially turn very warm. Equally, it could stay rather on the cool side. So we'll have to see how things play looking forward. But at least there's a fairly good trend here for the next 7 to 10 days. After that, things get a little bit more uncertain. So if you're trying to make hay and you need a prolonged dry spell, the best thing to do is to keep in touch with our forecasters. We're available every day, 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening on our forecast hotline here. Calls cost £1.50 a minute plus network access charges. And as I say, our forecasters are looking at all of this data continuously every day, and we'll try our best to give you the information you need, because right now there's no clear signal as to when we're going to get a prolonged dry spell, because there's just the odd shower here and there. But we'll be able to give you more detail day to day if you call up our forecasters here. As I say, we're open throughout the week, including the weekends as well. So to put a bit more detail on that on the European scale, this is how the rainfall anomaly looks like up until the middle of next week. So this is up until about we get that pattern change to something a bit more unsettled. Hence why it looks quite brown on the map here. As I say, there will be the odd shower around, particularly with that cold front coming through on Saturday, but there'll be very few and far between. It probably won't amount to very much. So for much of the time, we're still looking at dry conditions and therefore below average rainfall. And that actually extends across a good chunk of Europe here as well. So quite dry really. We've lost the intense heat we saw last week. That has been confined to southern areas, and it's because of that heat we've got these very wet conditions showing up, because these are basically daytime driven thunderstorms. Now these storms will be localized, but they could produce some fairly large hail. So parts of eastern Spain right across the Med through Italy into the Balkans. Locally we could have some perhaps crop damage from some large hail, that sort of thing. That's something we're keeping a very close eye on over the next week or so. From midweek onwards, things start to turn a bit more unsettled across the UK. So you can see there's a hint here of near average, which is white, or even slightly above average rainfall, which is the green showing up here. So there are indications things will turn a bit more unsettled midweek through to the end of next working week. Still though, a lot of dry weather across many northern parts of Europe, and still that continuation of these daytime driven thunderstorms continuing to give some quite wet conditions on a local scale across southern parts of Europe. Now beyond that, as I say, the confidence is rather low in how the forecast evolution will go, but the most favoured scenario right now is for areas of low pressure to run to the northwest of the UK. So it's often going to be wetter than normal across Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England too. But high pressure near the Azores will try and ridge across Western Europe. So generally France, Western Iberia into southern parts of Britain could end up being drier than normal. Can't promise it'll be completely dry, but overall the wettest conditions are more likely in the northwest and somewhat drier the further south you come. Across the rest of Europe, we've still got these daytime driven showers and thunderstorms ongoing, where the hottest weather will be across southern and eastern parts of Europe, still looking fairly dry across a good chunk of Scandinavia. And on into the final week, taking us towards the end of July, quite a strong signal for drier than normal weather over Iberia, still maintaining those southwesterly winds bringing rain across the northern half of Britain, drier somewhat the further south you come. And again, the signal is rather messy as to where it will be wetter and drier than average across Europe. But right now there's no sign of any intense heat wave building like we've seen over the last week or so, with just typical conditions for July likely to prevail across much of Europe over the coming weeks. So to summarise that for the UK, we're looking at mostly dry conditions for the next few days, bar a few isolated showers. But towards middle of next week, it may turn a bit more unsettled between the 10th and the 12th of July. Beyond that, it looks like high pressure may build back in, so becoming a bit more settled around the 13th to the 16th of July. And then, as I say, after a lot of uncertainty, but the most likely scenario is the further northwest you are, the more unsettled it'll be. Further southeast you are, the drier it'll be. It'll fluctuate between the low and the high winning out, but overall that's the most likely conditions for the next 4 weeks or so. If you have any comments or feedback or any questions you'd like us to answer in the next video, send them in to us by email, or you can use the hashtag WQFarmingForecast on Twitter. And if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to leave us a comment down below and click the subscribe button.